Hey everybody, I am Suzanne Barrett Justis. Thank you for showing up today. In this video, what we're gonna do is unbox a bunch of art materials. Now, everything that's in this box is what I expect all my in-studio art students to have with them when they show up for class. And it's what everybody in here that I have, and I have over 20 something, I have a lot of students. So what you're going to see is everything that I expect them to have on the first day of class. And so I ordered them for one of my incoming students because her husband was a bit intimidated to buy everything. He didn't know what was gonna, happen. And this was all a surprise gift for her. And well, anyway, he gave me his credit card. And so it's always fun when somebody gives you a credit card and says, I trust you, just get what you need. So I'm like, I got you, man. So of course she got everything she needs and then some. But what you're gonna see today is everything coming out of that box that I have all my art students use. Now, I will also say, if you are one of my YouTube watchers or one of my Patreon patrons, I would suggest that if you don't have, if you're just starting out and you're just really wanting to learn how to do oil painting, well, this video is going to show you basic, the starter set of stuff that you probably would need to start being an oil painter. Now, I don't include an easel, obviously, as, I've got a lot of student easels here in the studio, so, but what you're gonna see is basically the brushes and the palettes and the paints and all the mediums that I want my students to have when they come first day of class. So hopefully you'll find this video helpful. If you do, give it a thumbs up. Go ahead and do it now. I promise it's gonna be a good video. And if you are my subscribers, of course, I always thank you so much. We hit a certain milestone just recently, so I'm really, really excited. We just reached that 1,000 mark. And so I have you guys to thank for that. And yeah, and if you're not a subscriber, hey, come on, join the party. Why don't you have fun with us? Go ahead and hit that little guy right down there, that little owl, and that will take you right to, it will take you to subscribing, but it will also, you can ring the bell and you'll know when the next video will come out. So again, thank you, and let's go ahead and unbox this box of art supplies. Okay, so what we're gonna get into today is a little bit of an unboxing, but it's actually the materials that I ordered for one of my in-studio students. Her husband wanted to give her a gift of art lessons, right? So normally I just go ahead and supply my list of materials that I expect all my students to have. Now, he was a little intimidated by everything he saw online, even though I have everything listed for him. So I went ahead and ordered them, but interesting enough, I'm gonna make sure she gets exactly the stuff she needs to start my class. So I guess in today's video, you're gonna see not only what I expect my in-studio students to have when they start with me, but it wouldn't be a bad list of basic supplies that anybody could use if they're starting oil painting. So we're gonna get into this right now. Now I got my handy dandy scissors. We're gonna go ahead and open this box up. I do want to make sure, because she starts today, and I want to make sure that she has everything. I don't want to get into this box and go, they forgot something. So, I ordered everything here from Jerry's Artorama. We got lots of neat little packing stuff here. Oh yeah, okay. So all my students start, I expect them all to have Gamsol. And it's an odorless paint thinner, very low VOCs. This is a product made by Gamblin. This is the odorless paint thinner. I don't use turpentine here in the studio, okay? So she's got her Gamsol. And she also has her refined linseed oil. I love that they wrap it in case there's any leakage, right? But this too, this is also a Gamblin product, but I'm not as particular about the linseed as long as it's refined. I don't care where my students get it from. But yes, I personally use just Gamsol for getting the paint off my brushes, or sometimes when I'm doing a loose, just starting a piece, I might use the Gamsol. Linseed, of course, that's what I use to extend my paints to, lessen the viscosity and just kind of make it a little bit more fluid when it's going on the canvas. Okay, so she's got that. I bought her several different sizes. In my class, we pretty much start out small, so she's got some 8x10s and some 9x12 canvas boards. Okay. So that's what we use here. I also purchased just a nice, it's a student grade Windsor Newton, it's the Winton colors. It's just a small oil paint kit. I always suggest to all my students that you start out with good products. Do not buy, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say it, do not buy box store brands, okay? Because I'm not gonna say any names, but I only like a reputable brand of paint. And the reason is, they're consistent. So a burnt sienna and Windsor Newton paint is basically, you know, it's very similar to any of the other burnt siennas and some other good brand of paints. Also, with a good brand of paint, you're going to get a little, a lot more pigment. And it doesn't have a lot of filler stuff. I can tell you from a lot of the box store brands, you know, these craft stores, their name brand paints they're often made in China, and therefore they're, and I'm not saying it's knock against China per se, but it's been my experience that most of these brands, these off brands, these store brands, are low in pigment, and they have a bunch of other, let's face it, it's just crap you don't need. So save yourself the trouble, buy good brands of paint. Okay. So because my student is probably going to be doing a lot of landscapes and stuff, there's certain colors that I also recommended that she have that aren't included in your basic kits that you get, these basic little sets of paint. So I had her get a few other paints, and I kept everything in the same line of paints, the Windsor Newton Winton student grade paints, except although these are just actual Windsor Newtons. So she has a raw umber and alizerin crimson, which I use a lot of, and I like my students to have it as well. And she also has, this should be the dioxazine purple, because let's face it, it's just a great color. Oops, no, this one's sap green, is another good color. I like sap. So she's got her sap green. Also has some little containers just to store, you know, her mediums in. I usually will tell my students, if you've got little jelly jars, just use some jelly jars to have your Gamsol and your linseed oil in. But sometimes you just want to put a little bit out, and these are really handy little things. They're not expensive, good to have. We also have, now this is probably, oh, I did get her lots of paints. Wasn't I nice? It's fun when somebody else gives me a check or a credit card to go spend money on, and I can go hog wild. All right, so she's got her dioxazine purple, her Payne's gray, and some Prussian blue. So these are also fun colors that generally don't come in your basic starter kits of oil paints, but they're colors that I like my students to have. So if you have been following along with a lot of my YouTube or even Patreon channels, these right here, what you're seeing is what I always tell my students to start with. So if you are new to oil painting, this is not a bad start right here. Okay, now you'll see that in my my personal painting tutorials, I generally use rosemary brushes. I've learned just over the years that it's just the best brush. Now, for students that are just starting out, so they can just buy a set. I like, for student grade just starting out, because you don't know if they're going to be committed to it yet, blah, blah, blah. I have them get what is known as, it's made by Creative Mark. It's a brand that Jerry's does carry, Jerry's Artorama. And these are the Pro Strokes. These are the Powercryl Ultimate Acrylic. It says acrylic painting brushes, but actually they're just a synthetic bore. I like synthetics because they're a little bit more forgiving on so many levels. Forgiving in that they leave less strokes as opposed to, less stroke marks or on the canvas with the paint. so they're a little bit softer, but they still have the spring. They also hold up to people who abuse a brush pretty well. And I like my students to have rounds and filberts. Now, mainly because that's what I use. But these little sets, they're fairly inexpensive. They're really good little brushes. I actually for years used a lot of these as my workhorse brush, and I like this brush. Totally cheap brush, right? Totally cheap brush, but not a bad little brush for the money. So my students generally start off with these. And then I love it when I get to switch them over to start getting their first order together of their rosemary brushes, but anyhow. Now, another thing, because a lot of my students, they're only working with me for 2 hours once a week, I try to get them something so that they can mix a palette that kind of keeps. Now, these Masterson palettes are generally used for acrylic paint, but I like them. I like them for oil work. When you're using these, and you have these disposable liners. So what I do is I just set this little sucker right down inside the thing. As we need new palettes, we just, tear off a new sheet. But why I like these is they're sealable, and you can keep your paint and have your palette mix for whatever piece you're working on, and then seal it up. Now, some will say, if you take your palettes home, you can stick this sucker in the freezer, and your oil paints are good to go. Even 2 weeks, a week later, the next week, so on. So this is what my students use, and so I have a stack of Masterson palettes, because a lot of my students just leave their palettes here because it's just too cumbersome for them to carry. Although I do say you will extend the paint that you put out if you do put these, refrigerate them or put them in the freezer. Now, if you're like me, you don't have any space in your refrigerator or your freezer to shove a palette in. But then there are people that are a lot more tidy and don't have a problem with that. But there you have it. So what you see here, we've got our palette and our disposable palette liners. The Pro Stroke Powercryl brushes that I like for my students to start with. I have them in both rounds and filberts, and each set is a set of 5. So right there, you got 10 brushes, not very expensive, a good start. You saw all the different paints that I want my students to have. Of course, we went here, sometimes it's Gamblin paints. This time I happened to pick up the Windsor Newton because of the different colors that were included in the set. And I just went ahead and made sure that the paints that I got her, just for consistency's sake, just so she can, she's new, she's just starting out, so we're gonna make sure everything's good. So here we go, that's the oil paints, and we have these are the panels that I'll have her painting on. Little containers for the paint, for the mediums like the Gamsol and the oil. And we have the linseed oil, and we have the Gamsol. And that right there, folks, is basically how I start out my students when they're in studio. And it's not a bad setup right here. These products that you saw, I'll have it listed in the description for you guys so you can see. And yeah, that's pretty much my list. And so if you're following along on either YouTube or on my Patreon channel, this is what this isn't a bad set. Now, if you've been watching me long enough, and you know that I do like my rosemary brushes, oftentimes I'm asked, what is that brush? What brush are you using? And anytime I'm doing that, I usually leave that in the description. I've learned, because so many people are asking me what are the brushes? I'll leave it. So anyhow, if you have any questions about anything I covered today, go ahead and leave it in the comments section and I'll get to you. And yeah, this is just a little short video, but it's one that I think is pretty telling as far as what products do my students in-house use? So there you have it. So thanks for joining me today. If you are my subscribers, of course, I want to say a big, big thank you to you. If you're not, go ahead and subscribe. And if you like to watch more in-depth tutorials, painting tutorials and that sort of thing, go ahead and check out my Patreon channel. All that is left in the description in the video, so you can go ahead and check out the links there. And yeah, that's it. So from Kingsport, Tennessee, I want to say thank you and see you next time. Bye.